The river looked asleep. A flat, black mirror under a moon that couldn't decide if it was bright enough to matter. On the levee, the world held its breath. Mud packed hard as brick, willow shadows stitched across the slope, the smell of wet earth rising like a warning. A lantern moved along the top ridge, not fast, not panicked, the careful pace of someone searching who already fears what they'll find. Below, the Mississippi Delta spread out in darkness, fields and bayous and cabins, the faint geometry of fences swallowed by fog. And somewhere in that dark, the children were gone. Not one, not two, a whole cluster of them, like a handful of stars snapped out of the sky. A mother's voice carried across the levee, calling a name that kept breaking at the end. A father stood with both hands on his knees, staring at the river like it had done something personal. And the men who worked the levee, mud on their boots, shovels leaned like tired soldiers, kept their eyes down. Because in 1887, in the Delta, there were questions you didn't ask out loud. Not if you wanted to keep what little freedom you had. If you're sensitive to stories involving child abduction and forced labor, take care while listening. This script stays restrained, but the subject is heavy. This is the story of the Mississippi Delta disappearances of 1887, the freed children who never came home from the levee, and the quiet machinery that made them vanish. The Delta after freedom. To understand how children could disappear from a place as exposed as a levee, you have to understand the Delta itself. In the years after the Civil War, freedom in the Mississippi Delta came wrapped in conditions. Black families built lives under open sky, work, church, kin, small gardens behind cabins, a few chickens pecking in dust. They worked the land because they had to. They took sharecropping contracts because cash was scarce and options were narrower than the river. They tried to send their children to school when the season allowed. And they learned quickly that the line between free and claimed could still be crossed, quietly, through paper, debt, and the authority of a man who knew the law would lean his way. The levee was supposed to be protection. A wall of dirt to hold back a river that could swallow a year's work in a night. But the levee was also a workplace, a gathering point. A place where men arrived with shovels and left with blisters and mud caked to their shins. And in 1887, when the river ran high and the Delta watched the water like a predator, the levee became a stage for labor, for power, for disappearances. The children of Cotton Row. The families we follow in this story are not famous. That's the point. History remembers the names carved into courthouse stones, but it is built on the lives that never made it into ink. In a small cluster of cabins near a bend in the road, locals called it Cotton Row because the fields pressed close on both sides, lived the Carter family. No relation to the other Carters you might be thinking of. Just a common name in a common place. Eliza Carter was a mother with hands that showed her life. Calloused palms. Nails kept short because long nails caught on cotton bolls, a scar on one knuckle from splitting kindling when she was a girl. Her oldest son, Isaiah, was 13, tall for his age, with a quiet, watchful way of moving as if he'd learned early that attention could be dangerous. Her daughter, Lottie, was 10 and stubborn, hair always escaping its braids. And then there was Ben, 8 years old, too curious for his own safety, always wanting to look over the next ridge, always wanting to know what the men were talking about. Across the road lived Reverend Moses Green and his wife, Ada. Moses wasn't an old man, but the Delta could age you fast. He carried himself like someone holding a community together with thread. He preached on Sundays. He read letters for people who couldn't. He kept a small shelf of books that smelled like damp paper and ambition, and he had one rule that made him unpopular with certain men in town. He asked questions. A few cabins down, Miss Ruth Whitfield taught children in a one-room schoolhouse, when the fields didn't demand them. She was young, sharp-eyed, and fearless in that quiet way. Fearless not because she didn't know danger existed, but because she refused to let danger set the terms of her life. The children liked her because she treated them like they were already becoming something. The county men disliked her for the same reason. A river that never promises. Spring in the Delta could turn on you. One day the air was soft, heavy with the scent of magnolia. The next, thunderheads rolled in like bruises, and the river rose. In 1887, the water came early. Not a dramatic flood, at least not at first. A slow, deliberate swelling. The kind that made old men stand on porches and squint toward the levee line. The kind that made planters send riders down the road with messages. The kind that made the levee boss, everyone called him Mr. Pike, though no one was sure if that was his real name, start recruiting hands. Men with shovels, men with strong backs, men who couldn't afford to refuse. Levee work was paid, sometimes, but it was also controlled. Who got chosen? Who got turned away? Who got paid in coins? Who got paid in credit at the company store? And who got told, with a smile too sharp to be friendly, that their debt was now bigger than they remembered. On a gray morning with the air humming like a wire, Mr. Pike's riders came through Cotton Row. They knocked on doors. They called names. They pointed at men like they were picking tools off a shelf. Eliza Carter watched from her doorway. Isaiah stood beside her, jaw tight. Across the road, Reverend Moses was already outside, hat in his hand, listening. Mr. Pike's rider, a white man with a narrow face and a whip coiled at his saddle like decoration, lifted a clipboard. "Levee needs hands," he said. His eyes slid, not resting on the children long enough to be polite. "River's rising." Eliza didn't respond. She'd learned that silence could be a shield. But shields have gaps. Because the rider added, almost casually, "Some boys could help too, running water, carrying lunches. Ain't hard." Eliza's stomach tightened. In the Delta, when a man said, "ain't hard," it usually meant it would cost you later. Reverend Moses stepped forward. "Children got school," he said. The rider smiled. It wasn't warmth. It was warning. "School don't hold back water," he said, and he rode on. The first missing child. It started small. That's how these stories always start. Not because the harm is small, because the first sign is easy to dismiss, if you want to. A boy named Caleb, 11, went with his uncle to the levee line with a bucket and a tin cup. He was supposed to carry water to the men. He was supposed to be home by dusk. He never came. His uncle returned alone, face pale, eyes darting. "He went to the latrine," the uncle said, "just for a minute." He kept repeating that phrase like if he said it enough times the minute would rewind. The uncle described how he turned his head to answer a question, how he looked back, and Caleb was gone. No scream, no struggle. Just absence. The levee boss shrugged. "He wandered," he said. A deputy standing nearby, badge catching the weak afternoon light, added, "Kids run off, always have." Caleb's mother went to the sheriff. She waited in the hallway outside the office, staring at a wall where someone had nailed a poster about vagrancy. She could read enough to understand the threat. When the sheriff finally spoke to her, he didn't stand. He didn't invite her to sit. He told her that the river was rising, that the county was busy, that boys were foolish. And then, like a man tossing a bone to a dog, he asked, "Caleb got any trouble? Any tendencies?" The way he said it made it sound like her child's disappearance was a moral flaw. Caleb's mother left with her hands shaking, not from fear. From the effort it took not to break the sheriff's jaw with a lamp. The levee takes more. Within 2 weeks, it wasn't 1 child, it was 3, then 5. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic sweep. A boy who went to carry lunches, a girl who went to fetch her father's coat, 2 brothers who walked the ridgeline collecting firewood for the cook tent. Gone. The pattern wasn't random. The missing children were always black, always from families that didn't have protection, always from the edge, sharecropper cabins, labor camps, the places where people lived close to the land and farther from the courthouse. And the levee. The levee was the perfect place, a strip of earth with constant movement, men coming and going, wagons loaded with tools, teams of mules pulling carts, shouts in the wind. A place where a child could be guided, firmly, quickly, down the slope and into the trees. And if anyone saw, they could pretend they didn't, because pretending was how you stayed alive. What the adults whispered. At night, the delta changed. Crickets rose in waves. Frogs called from dark water. The air thickened, damp and warm, and the smell of the river drifted into cabins like an uninvited guest. Families gathered in doorways, watching the road. Lanterns burned longer. Women kept knives on the table without bothering to hide them. Men spoke in low voices, not because they didn't have rage, because rage spoken too loud could bring company. The whispers had a shape. A phrase that slid from mouth to mouth like smoke, levee gang. Another phrase, contract boys. And the ugliest phrase of all, debt work. In some counties, people already knew about labor rings, men who worked with local law to arrest black men, and sometimes boys, on small charges, then lease them out to plantations, lumber camps, railroad crews. The paperwork made it legal. The whips made it real. But children? Children were a different kind of theft. Children weren't supposed to be on those lists. Not officially. Which meant if children were being taken, there had to be another method. Another kind of paper. Another kind of lie. Miss Ruth Whitfield began keeping her own records, not in the official school log. In a separate notebook she hid under a loose floorboard. Names, ages, the day last seen. Who they were with, what they were carrying, small details, because she understood that small details were what survived when people tried to erase you. Reverend Moses called a meeting in the back of the church. Only trusted faces, only lantern light, only quiet. Eliza Carter came with Isaiah and Lottie. Ben stayed home, sulking. He wanted to be useful. Eliza wanted him alive. The meeting wasn't a sermon, it was a strategy session. "How many?" Moses asked. A man near the door answered, 7. Another voice added, 9 if you count the 2 from up near St. Francis Road. Miss Ruth's pencil scratched. Eliza felt a coldness settle in her chest. 9. A number big enough to be a pattern. And patterns were dangerous. Because once you admitted it was a pattern, you had to admit someone was designing it. And if someone was designing it, that someone had power. They spoke about the levee boss, Mr. Pike. They spoke about the deputy who always seemed to be near when a child went missing. Deputy Kessler, a white man with a thick mustache and a habit of tapping his baton against his boot, like he was keeping time. They spoke about wagons seen leaving the levee late at night, canvas-covered, moving fast, taking back roads. One man, older, bent at the shoulders, said he'd heard a child crying near the river road after midnight. When he stepped outside, the crying stopped. He never saw anything. He went back inside. Because he had daughters. Because fear has children too. The inciting moment. The irreversible moment, the one that turned dread into certainty, came on a Saturday. The river rose again. Not in a gentle swell. In a sudden push, a hungry shove against the levee like a shoulder testing a door. The levee boss ordered extra hands. Men worked in shifts. Cook fires burned day and night, and children were used more because adults were exhausted. Eliza Carter's cousin, June, begged Eliza to let Isaiah come with her to the levee line. "Just to carry bread," June said. "We'll be right there. The men need it." Eliza shook her head. June kept pleading. Eliza felt the pressure of it. Community pressure, survival pressure, the cruel arithmetic of the Delta. If the levee failed, everyone suffered. But if Isaiah went... Eliza looked at her son. Isaiah stood still, eyes steady. "I can help," he said. He didn't sound eager. He sounded determined. Eliza wanted to say no. She wanted to lock him inside and nail the door. But she also knew that refusing the levee boss could bring its own consequences. Men like Pike had long memories. They remembered who cooperated. They remembered who didn't. So Eliza gave conditions. Isaiah would go with June. He would stay in sight. He would not leave the ridge. He would come straight home. Lottie begged to go too. Eliza refused. Ben begged. Eliza refused. Isaiah walked out with a cloth sack of cornbread and cured meat. He looked back once. Just once. And Eliza saw something in his face she couldn't name. A flicker. As if he'd stepped onto a path and wasn't sure where it ended. By dusk, June returned alone. Her eyes were wild, her hair half undone. She stumbled onto Eliza's porch like someone escaping a fire. "Eliza," she said. Eliza didn't ask where Isaiah was, because her body already knew. June's voice came out cracked. "He was right there," she whispered. "Right there by the cook tent. I turned to hand a pan to Mrs. Lowry and he wasn't." Eliza's hands clenched so hard her nails bit her palms. "Where'd he go?" Eliza demanded. June shook her head fast. I don't know. Deputy Kessler was there. He said Isaiah was needed down the line. He said he'd escort him." Eliza's heart didn't just drop. It hardened. Because that was the first time a name, an authority, had touched her child. Not rumor. Not whisper. A deputy. A badge. A word like needed. Eliza grabbed her shawl and stepped off the porch. She didn't tell June to sit. She didn't tell Ben to stay back. She didn't tell Lottie to lock the door. She moved like a woman walking into a storm. The levee at night. The levee after dark was a different world. Lanterns hung from poles. Firelight licked at faces. Men's silhouettes moved in tired rhythm. Shovel, lift, tamp. The river hissed and whispered below, restless. Eliza climbed the slope, breath sharp. Reverend Moses came behind her, fast, because someone had already run to fetch him. Miss Ruth followed too, skirt tucked up, notebook in her pocket, eyes fixed ahead. At the top, Mr. Pike stood near a table, talking to two white men with rolled sleeves. Deputy Kessler was nearby. Eliza went straight at them. "I need my son," she said. Pike blinked as if surprised she had the nerve. "What son?" he asked. Isaiah's name burned in Eliza's mouth. She said it. Pike shrugged. "Boy was helping," he said. "Maybe he wandered." Eliza's voice sharpened. "He didn't wander." Deputy Kessler stepped forward. He was close enough now that Eliza could smell tobacco on him. His hand rested near his baton. Not gripping it, displaying it. "Ma'am," he said, slow, "you're causing a disruption." Eliza stared at the badge, at the metal catching firelight, at the authority that could make a lie sound like law. "My son," she repeated. Kessler's eyes flicked over her shoulder, to Moses, to Ruth, to the other black workers watching with faces carefully blank. "Go home," Kessler said. Not an order. A warning. Reverend Moses stepped up. "You're telling a mother to go home without her child?" he said. Kessler's smile was thin. "I'm telling you," he said, "that if you keep this up, I'll have to write things down." Write things down. Paper, ink, charges, the Delta's favorite weapon. Miss Ruth spoke then, voice calm but hard. "Where is the record?" she asked. "If he was needed, where is the note? Who ordered it?" Pike's eyes narrowed. "Schoolmarm," he said, like it tasted bad. "Mind your business." Ruth didn't flinch. "When children disappear," she said, "it becomes everybody's business." For a moment, the air tightened. Men stopped shoveling. The river seemed louder. Kessler's hand moved slightly. Then Pike raised a palm, casual. "Look," he said, "we got water coming. You want to argue? Go argue with the river." And then he did something smart. He turned away. Dismissal is powerful. It tells you that your pain doesn't change the world. Eliza lunged, one step, like she might grab his sleeve. Moses caught her arm. "Not here," he whispered. Eliza's breath shook. Because Moses was right. Not here. On the levee, surrounded by men who worked for Pike and deputies who wrote things down. Not here, where the ring, if it existed, was strongest. Eliza backed up slowly, but she didn't leave. She looked down the levee line. She searched the silhouettes. She called Isaiah's name. Nothing answered. No voice, no footstep. Only the river. The first proof. They couldn't fight the levee boss with rage. They needed proof, and proof in 1887, Mississippi was a fragile thing, a piece of paper, a witness who didn't disappear, a detail that could be repeated the same way twice. That night, Miss Ruth pulled Reverend Moses aside. "There's a boy," she whispered, "over by the tool shed. He's not from here." Moses followed her gaze. A child, maybe 12, sat on a crate near a lantern. His clothes were too clean for levee work. His eyes were too afraid. Moses walked over slowly. The boy flinched as he approached. Moses lowered himself, gentle. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy stared at his hands. He didn't answer. Ruth crouched too. Her voice softened. "Are you waiting for someone?" The boy swallowed. A whisper. They said I got to go with them." Moses's stomach went cold. "With who?" The boy's eyes flicked toward the darkness beyond the lantern line. "Deputy," he whispered. "He said I was picked." Ruth's pencil appeared as if by instinct. "What deputy?" The boy hesitated. His fear wasn't childish. It was trained. Then he said, barely audible, "Kessler." Moses stood slowly. Across the levee, Deputy Kessler laughed at something a white man said. His shoulders relaxed, his posture comfortable. Like a man with nothing to hide, Moses and Ruth exchanged a look that felt like stepping off a cliff. Because now it wasn't only Eliza's word. Now it was a child's. And a name. A plan in the dark. They couldn't confront Kessler again on the levee. They needed distance. They needed daylight. And they needed allies. Reverend Moses knew one place where rules shifted. Just slightly. The rail stop town 2 counties over. More people. More merchants. More eyes. And crucially, a black newspaperman who sometimes passed through, collecting stories the county papers wouldn't touch. Moses had spoken to him once, a man named Mr. Tallmidge, not rich, not powerful, but stubborn. Stubborn enough to print words. Ruth agreed to go. Eliza insisted too, not because she thought her rage would help. Because she refused to let other people carry her son's story while she stayed home and waited. They moved before dawn. No lantern, no talking, just the soft push of feet on packed earth and the sound of distant water. Ben tried to follow. Eliza turned, grabbed his shoulders, and held him. "You stay," she said. Ben's eyes filled. "I can help," he whispered. Eliza kissed his forehead. "You can live," she said. "That's how you help." Lottie watched from the doorway, fists clenched. Eliza looked at her daughter. "Watch your brother," she said. Lottie nodded. Too serious for 10. On the road to the rail stop. The road out of the Delta was straight in places and swallowed in others. Cotton fields, cypress stands, a creek crossing where the boards creaked underfoot. They moved with the morning mist clinging to their clothes. Ruth carried her notebook like a weapon. Moses carried a folded Bible, not for comfort, for credibility. Eliza carried nothing. Her hands were empty, but her eyes were full. At a bend in the road, they heard hooves, not close, but enough. They stepped off into brush, holding breath. A rider passed, white man, brimmed hat, rifle across his lap. He didn't look at the brush, but his horse did. Its ears flicked, its nostrils flared, and for a long second, Eliza thought the animal might betray them. Then it moved on. They waited until the sound faded. Ruth whispered, "They're watching." Moses didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Newspaperman. By late morning, they reached the rail-stop town. It smelled like coal and wet wood. A whistle cried in the distance. Men in overalls moved crates. Women carried baskets. A different kind of busy. A kind that made it harder for one deputy to control everything. They found Mr. Tallmidge in a small office behind a barber shop. Ink smell, paper stacks, a single window throwing dusty light across a desk. Mr. Tallmidge looked up as they entered. He had the tired eyes of someone who'd heard too many stories that ended badly. When Moses spoke, when Eliza spoke the name Isaiah, Talmage's face tightened. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't say, "We'll fix it." He asked questions. Exact questions. How many children? What dates? Which levee line? Who saw what? Ruth opened her notebook. Names, details, patterns. Talmage's fingers tapped the desk. "This is dangerous," he said. Eliza's voice came out low. "So is silence," she replied. Tallmidge nodded once. "All right," he said. "We'll do it careful." He wrote a headline in pencil, small, not dramatic, not mass kidnapping, not ring. He wrote, "Missing children reported near levee work." Because sometimes, to tell the truth, you have to sneak it past the gatekeepers. The County Strikes Back news travels in the Delta faster than the river. By the time Eliza returned to Cotton Row, 2 days later, exhausted, clothes dusted with road grit, the air had changed. People avoided her eyes, not because they blamed her, because her courage had become contagious. And contagious things frighten those who survive by staying still. A deputy horse stood near her cabin. Deputy Kessler. He leaned against the rail like he owned it. His smile was calm. Eliza felt heat surge through her. Moses stepped forward first. "Kessler," he said. Kessler tipped his hat. "Reverend," he said. "Schoolmarm." His eyes flicked to Eliza. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Heard you've been traveling." Eliza didn't speak. Kessler's voice softened, almost friendly. "People get worried," he said, "when folks go stirring trouble." Ruth's voice was sharp. "Trouble is children disappearing," she said. Kessler's smile didn't move. "You got proof?" he asked. Moses lifted his chin. "We got testimony," he said. Kessler's eyes hardened a fraction. "Testimony from who?" he asked. "The boy from the levee. The one who said Kessler picked him." But Moses didn't say it out loud. Because the boy was still alive. And keeping him alive was part of the proof. Kessler leaned forward. "Let me give you advice," he said. "Stop this. Go back to your routines. River's rising. Folks need to focus." Eliza finally spoke. "I want my son," she said. Kessler's eyes held hers, and in that stare was something honest. Not cruelty, exactly. Certainty. The certainty of a man who believed the world was arranged for his benefit. "Maybe he ain't your son no more," Kessler said, voice low enough that only the three of them heard. Eliza's breath caught. Ruth stepped forward like she might strike him. Moses grabbed her arm. Kessler straightened, smile returning. "Good day," he said. And he rode away. The search tightens. After Kessler's visit, the community understood something important. This wasn't neglect, it was intention. Ruth began meeting families at night, collecting names. Moses sent messages to churches farther out. Eliza walked roads at dusk. Searching wagon tracks, she learned to read the ground, a fresh hoof print, a wheel rut, a broken cane stalk, small signs, like the delta itself was whispering. Then, one night, a man arrived at Moses's cabin. He was a riverman, a deckhand from a small steamer that ran supplies up and down the river. His name was Henry, and he smelled like river water and tobacco. He stood on Moses's porch, hat in hand, eyes darting. "I seen something," he said. Moses didn't invite him inside. He didn't want the man's shadow on the wall. He wanted the story in the open air, where it could flee if it needed to. "What you seen?" Moses asked. Henry swallowed. "Night before last," he said. "We tied off near the levee just for an hour. I was on deck. I saw wagons. Canvas over 'em." Eliza's heart slammed. "How many?" she asked. Henry's voice shook. "2, he said. "Maybe 3. They came down the ridge. I heard crying." Eliza stepped closer. "Children?" she whispered. Henry nodded once. "They was quieting 'em," he said. Not gentle, just pushing down the sound." Moses's face went still. "Where'd they go?" he asked. Henry lifted a hand and pointed. "Toward the river road," he said. "Toward the landing." The landing. The place where boats took freight. The place where a child could be loaded like a sack and moved out of the county before morning. Ruth's pencil moved in the dark. "Did you see who?" she asked. Henry hesitated. Then he said it. "I saw Kessler's hat," he whispered. Eliza's knees went weak for a second, not from shock, from the strange relief of certainty, because now they had a witness, a riverman. A man not tied to Pike's payroll, a man who could describe wagons, route, time. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to hunt for the next link. A door opens. Mr. Tallmidge printed a second piece, this time bolder. He didn't name Kessler, but he described a deputy. He described wagons. He described the pattern. The article traveled, folded into pockets, read aloud in church basements, passed hand to hand in barber shops, and it reached a place the county didn't control. It reached a state official, not a saint, not a crusader, but a man who understood politics. And politics, sometimes, requires acting like you care. A letter came back to Reverend Moses. Simple paper, official stamp, a promise of inquiry, a promise to review reports. It wasn't justice, but it was movement. And movement is what the ring, if it was a ring, couldn't tolerate, because rings rely on stillness, on everyone staying in their assigned place. Where this story turns, by the time the state man was due to arrive, 2 weeks out, because urgency moves slow when it has to cross county lines, the levee camp began shifting. Tools moved. Wagons left earlier. Men who had been visible became suddenly absent. Pike stopped showing his face at certain hours. Kessler's horse appeared less on the main road and more on the back ones. The air felt like it did before a storm. Heavy. Waiting. And in that waiting, Eliza received a message. Not from a deputy, not from the courthouse, from a child. Lottie came running from the road, face flushed. "Ma," she whispered, tugging Eliza's sleeve. "A boy's in the trees." Eliza's stomach dropped. "What boy?" Lottie's eyes were wide. "He ain't talking loud," Lottie said. "But he said he knows Isaiah." Eliza's breath stopped, because that was the first time Isaiah's name had come back from the dark. And that's where we step into the next chapter of this story. Not with answers, with a whisper from the trees. and a mother who has reached the point where fear can't stop her anymore. The boy in the trees didn't step out like a child. He stepped out like a hunted thing. He was thin enough that his shirt hung off him wrong, and he kept his weight on the back foot, ready to bolt. One hand held a stick like it was a weapon. The other hand stayed close to his chest, fingers curled. Moonlight caught his face. Not a boy's softness. A bruise-colored fatigue. A split lip half-healed. Mud dried in the seams of his ears. He looked at Eliza, and his eyes flicked past her to the cabin, to the road, to the darkness, mapping exits. Lottie stood near the porch post, trying to be brave. Ben hovered behind her, shaking. Reverend Moses raised an open palm. "Easy," he said. The boy didn't ease. Eliza kept her voice low, the way you speak to a cornered animal. "You said you know Isaiah," she whispered. That name did something to him. His chin twitched. He swallowed hard. "I seen him," the boy said. Eliza felt her heart slam against her ribs like it wanted out. "Where?" The boy's eyes darted. "Down by the landing," he said. "Night. They took him." Moses's voice tightened. "Who is they?" The boy hesitated, then spoke the word like it was poison. "Deputy," he said. "Kessler." Eliza's hands clenched. Miss Ruth stepped out of the shadows by the steps, notebook in hand. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy stared at her pencil like it could cut him. "Leon," he said finally. "Leon Davis." Ruth wrote it down, careful. "How old are you, Leon?" Leon blinked. 12. Ruth nodded once. "Where have you been?" she asked. Leon's mouth opened, closed. Then the words came in a rush, like he'd been holding them behind his teeth for weeks. "Levee first," he said. "Then they put us in a wagon, canvas. Couldn't see, couldn't talk. They said we was contract boys now. Said we owed. I don't owe. I ain't signed nothing." Eliza's throat tightened. Leon continued, eyes glossy. "They took us to a place by the river road, a shed. Men there, white men. One black man too, but he wouldn't look at us. They wrote stuff on paper. They said our name's different. They said if we say our real names, we get whipped." Ruth's pencil paused. Moses's face went still. Eliza didn't ask what whipped looked like. She didn't need the picture. Leon's voice dropped. "They kept us 2 nights. Then they put some of us on a boat, not big, like a freight boat. They loaded us like sacks. Kessler was there. He talked to the captain." Eliza's knees threatened to fold. Isaiah. On a boat. Not dead in the river. Not swallowed by the levee. Moved. Transported. Stolen the way goods are stolen. "Isaiah was there?" Eliza forced out. Leon nodded. "I seen him. He was trying to keep quiet. He looked like he was holding his breath all the time." Eliza's eyes burned. "How do you know it was him?" Moses asked. Leon's gaze flicked toward Eliza. "He said his name," Leon whispered. "Low. To me. He said—" Leon swallowed, voice cracking. He said, "Tell my mama I didn't run." Eliza made a sound she didn't recognize. Not a sob, not a scream. A broken animal noise pulled out of her chest. She grabbed the porch rail and held on. Miss Ruth's voice came soft and deadly calm. "Leon," she said, "how did you get away?" Leon's eyes lowered. "Boat stopped at night," he whispered. "They tied off. Men drank. They was laughing. I slipped." "How?" Leon lifted his wrist. Rope burn, raw skin. "I chewed," he said. Ruth wrote that too. Chewed. A child chewing his way out of a knot. Moses exhaled slowly. "This changes things," he said. Eliza's voice was hoarse. "Where does the boat go?" Leon pointed. Not north or south like a compass. He pointed like someone who had watched the river long enough to know its habits. "Up," he said. "Toward the Big Bend. toward the mills. Ruth's eyes met Moses's. The mills, lumber, rail, places where names could be swapped and children could be erased into work. Eliza's fists tightened. No more waiting. No more hoping a sheriff would care. If Isaiah was alive, he was somewhere reachable. And reachable meant huntable. The three things they needed that night in Moses's cabin, they laid out what they had like pieces on a table. Not weapons, information. First, Leon's testimony. Second, Henry the Riverman's account of wagons and a route to the landing. Third, the newspaper trail, Mr. Tallmage's print that had reached state ears. They needed three more things. A safe place for Leon. A way to keep Kessler from silencing Henry. And a moment. The moment when a man with a badge could be made to answer questions in front of witnesses he couldn't control. Ruth proposed it with the bluntness of someone tired of whispering. "We trapped the story in daylight," she said. Moses frowned. "How?" Ruth tapped her notebook. "The state man," she said. "He's coming. He won't arrive to a blank table. He'll arrive to a table set." Eliza stared into the lantern flame. "And Isaiah?" she asked. Moses's voice softened. "We bring him home," he said. Eliza didn't answer, because she no longer trusted promises. She trusted plans. Ruth turned to Henry. "You said the landing," she said. "You said canvas wagons. You said night." Henry nodded, face pale. "If they're moving children by boat," Ruth said, "they'll do it again. Because they think they can." Moses's eyes narrowed. "They'll move them before the state man arrives," he said. Ruth nodded. "And if we know when," she said, "we know where to look." Eliza leaned forward. "How we know when?" Leon whispered. "They talk." All eyes turned. Leon's fingers twisted together. "At the shed," he said. "They said Saturday night. Said water rising makes it easy. Folks busy. Noise. Said they'd clear the line." Saturday. 4 nights away. A ticking clock. Eliza stood. "Then we go Saturday," she said. Moses held her gaze. "Not alone?" he said. Eliza's voice was iron. "I ain't been alone since the day they took him," she replied. A hiding place for a child. Before they could move on Saturday, they had to keep Leon alive, because Leon was proof. And proof, living proof, was always the first thing a ring tried to destroy. They sent Leon with Ada Green, Moses's wife, to a family upriver who owed no debts to Pike and had kin in another county. Ada wrapped Leon in a spare coat, tucked a tin of biscuits into his hands, and kissed his forehead like he belonged. Leon didn't cry. He just kept looking back as they walked him away, like he expected hands to come out of the dark and pull him back. When he was gone, the cabin felt emptier, not quieter, just thinner, as if hope had left the room and taken warmth with it. Miss Ruth sat at her small table and rewrote the notebook entries into a clean set of pages. Ink, straight lines, no smudges, because she understood what the state man would understand. Messy truth is easy to dismiss. Neat truth is harder. Moses rode to the rail stop town to meet Tallmidge. He didn't say Kessler. He didn't say Pike. He said, "Be ready." Tallmidge didn't ask why. He just nodded. And Eliza walked to the levee in daylight. Not to plead, to watch. She watched who came and went. She watched which wagon carried tools and which wagon carried canvas. She watched which men spoke to Kessler. She watched the landing road. She learned the rhythm. Because rhythm is how you anticipate a predator. Saturday night at the landing. The Delta. On Saturday night felt like a held breath. The sky was low with cloud. Humidity clung to skin. Insects buzzed around lanterns like they were desperate. The river below the levee line moved thick and dark, a slow muscle. Eliza, Moses, Ruth, and Henry waited in a stand of willows near the landing road. Not close enough to be seen, close enough to hear. Henry had chosen the spot. "This is where they'll pass," he whispered. Ruth held her notebook tight in her pocket like it could protect her. Moses held his Bible. Eliza held nothing. Her hands were empty again, but now emptiness looked like readiness. Hours passed. A distant owl called. A mule brayed somewhere far off. Then wheels. Slow, controlled, canvas rustling. A wagon rolled into view, pulled by 2 mules. Then another. 2 wagons. Just like Henry said. A lantern swung from the first wagon's side, its light leaking through canvas in small, moving rectangles. Men walked alongside. One carried a rifle. One carried a whip coiled like rope. And on the second wagon seat, hat brim low, sat Deputy Kessler. Eliza's breath stopped. There, the badge, the certainty. Moses's hand tightened around the Bible. Ruth's eyes were wide, cataloging. Henry swallowed hard. The wagons passed. A sound came from inside, not loud, a muffled, choked sob, a child trying not to be heard. Eliza's muscles tightened like she was about to leap. Moses whispered, "Wait." Eliza's jaw clenched. They followed at a distance, feet soft on dirt. The wagons turned onto the landing itself, a small dock of rough planks, a low, ugly boat tied off, smokestack dark, engine quiet. A man stood on the boat deck, arms folded. The captain. Kessler dismounted. He spoke to the captain. Henry's voice barely moved. "That's Caro," he whispered. "River captain. He'll take anything for coin." Eliza stared. Kessler moved to the canvas flap. He lifted it. Lantern light spilled out. And for a heartbeat, Eliza saw faces. Children, huddled, eyes reflecting light like animals. One boy's head lifted, too tall to be little, a familiar line of cheek. Eliza's blood roared. Isaiah, the boy's eyes widened. Even from this distance, Eliza knew he recognized her shape. His mouth opened. Kessler snapped the canvas down. Eliza moved. She didn't decide. Her body decided. But Ruth grabbed her sleeve. "Eliza," Ruth hissed, "if we rush, they'll scatter. They'll shoot. They'll drown them." Eliza froze. Not because she wanted to, because Ruth was right. The ring's power wasn't only cruelty, it was chaos. They could turn the river itself into an accomplice. Moses whispered, "We need witnesses." Eliza's eyes burned. "We are witnesses," she whispered. Moses's voice was steady. "We need witnesses they can't erase." Henry shifted. "We got one," he whispered. He nodded toward the road. A silhouette, a wagon, another sound of wheels, a second group arriving. Not Pike's wagons, not Levee men. A different wagon, 2 men in it. One held a lantern, the other held papers. Mr. Tallmidge. And behind him, unexpected, impossible, 2 white men. Not deputies, not county. Their posture was different. Their coats were better. Their eyes were sharper. State. Moses's breath caught. Tallmidge had brought them. He'd done it. He had carried the story into a room where political men decided what they needed to care about. The state men stepped down, lantern high. They walked toward the landing. And as their light hit the wagons, everything changed. Kessler turned. His body stiffened. The captain on the boat shifted his stance. The men with rifles glanced at each other. The ring recognized danger. Not moral danger, visibility. One of the state men called out. "Evening," he said, voice carrying. Kessler's smile appeared. Fast, automatic. "Evening," he replied. The state man lifted a paper. "We've received reports," he said. "We're inspecting." Kessler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Inspecting what?" he asked. The state man's lantern swung slightly, illuminating the canvas wagons. "Those," he said. Kessler took one step. Not toward them. Between them and the wagons. "You got no jurisdiction here," he said. The stateman's voice stayed calm. "I have a mandate to investigate unlawful labor practices," he said, "and missing children. Which one do you want to discuss first?" Silence. The river lapped against the dock. A mosquito whined. Then Kessler did the thing men like him always do. He tried to turn it into paperwork. "These are vagrants," he said. "Picked up wandering. I'm transporting them for placement." "Placement," Ruth whispered bitterly. The stateman's eyes narrowed. "Open the wagon," he said. Kessler's jaw flexed. "You're making trouble," he said. The other stateman stepped forward. "You don't want trouble," he said. "Open the wagon." Kessler looked at the men with rifles. They shifted, uncertain, because they weren't used to uncertainty. They were used to control. Eliza felt Ruth's hand squeeze her arm. "Now," Ruth whispered. They stepped out of the willows, not running, walking into lantern light. Eliza's voice cut the air. "My son is in that wagon." Every head turned. Kessler's eyes snapped to her, for the first time. His calm cracked. Eliza walked closer. Not toward Kessler, toward the canvas, toward Isaiah. Kessler's hand twitched toward his baton. Moses stepped in line beside Eliza. Ruth stepped too. Tallmidge stood behind, expression grim. The stateman lifted his lantern higher. "This woman says her child is in there," he said. "If you are moving minors, Deputy, you are in deep violation." Kessler's face hardened. He tried one last tactic. Threat. "This is an active flood zone," he said. "People die when outsiders interfere." The stateman didn't blink. "Open it," he said. Kessler stared. Then, slowly, so slow it felt like the night itself was straining, he reached for the canvas. He pulled it back. Lantern light flooded inside. Children blinked. Hands rose instinctively, shielding eyes. A girl's hair was matted to her forehead. A boy's wrists were red. And Isaiah lifted his face. Eliza saw him, and something inside her broke and healed at the same time. Isaiah's mouth moved. "Mama," he whispered. Eliza stepped forward. She didn't climb into the wagon. She didn't need to. She held her hands out. Isaiah lunged, almost falling. He grabbed her fingers. He held on like he thought he might drift away. The stateman's voice went cold. "These are children," he said. Kessler's jaw clenched. "They were wandering," he said. Ruth's voice snapped. "They were taken," she said. The captain on the boat shifted. He started to speak. The second stateman pointed at him. "Stay," he said. The captain froze. Because state authority had weight in a way county authority didn't. It had backing. It had optics. It had the potential to become headlines. And nothing frightens a ring like headlines. The immediate aftermath. The night didn't end with handcuffs and satisfying justice. Real life doesn't do that. What it did was messier. Children were moved off wagons and gathered near the dock, blankets thrown over shoulders. Some cried. Some stared. Some didn't speak at all. Eliza held Isaiah so tightly her arms hurt. Isaiah's hands shook against her back. His voice was small. "They said you wouldn't come," he whispered. Eliza swallowed hard. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here." Moses spoke to the state men. Ruth handed over her clean pages. Names, dates, patterns. Henry told his story. Wagons, route, crying out loud in lantern light. Tallmage listened like he was carving the words into his memory. Kessler stood aside, face stiff. Not arrested, not yet, but watched. And being watched was new. Mr. Pike never appeared at the landing. That was another truth. The men at the center rarely stand at the edge when the blade falls. They send others. They hide behind "I didn't know." They keep their hands clean. Or they try to. The state men ordered the children taken to the rail stop town. Not back to the levee. Not back to the county jail. To a place with more eyes, more doors, more chance that a child could be identified and returned. Eliza insisted Isaiah ride with her. No arguments, no paperwork. Her son had been turned into paper once. It wouldn't happen again. The days after, what the Delta did. In the week that followed, the Delta did what it always did. It adjusted. It tried to swallow the disturbance and return to routine. County men muttered. Store owners suddenly forgot names. Levee workers kept their heads down. Fear moved from cabin to cabin like smoke. But something else moved too. Something rarer. A story. A story that had become too large to silence entirely. Tallmage printed it. This time, bolder. Still careful with names, but clear in accusation. Children had been taken. Children had been transported. A deputy had been present. A Levee labor system had been used as cover. The paper traveled. It reached towns. It reached churches. It reached black communities up and down the river who had their own missing children. And suddenly, the Mississippi Delta disappearances of 1887 were no longer a few families' tragedy. They were evidence of a wider machine. The state inquiry expanded. Slowly, unevenly, but it expanded. Men were questioned, not the way people hoped, not with dramatic courtroom scenes, with paperwork, with depositions, with quiet meetings in offices where the air smelled like ink and compromise. Some people expected Kessler to fall hard. They expected jail. They expected a clean ending. What they got was closer to the truth of power. Kessler denied. Pike denied. The captain denied. Men claimed they were relocating vagrants. They said the children wandered. They said families were overreacting. They said outsiders didn't understand the Delta. That last line was almost funny. Because it was the Delta, its isolation, its hierarchy, its quiet, being used as justification. Moses pressed, Ruth pressed, Eliza pressed, and pressure matters. Even when it doesn't break the wall, it leaves cracks. Who came home? Not all the children rescued at the landing belonged to Cotton Row. Some were from miles away. Some were from names Ruth had already written. When families arrived at the rail stop town, the reunions weren't like movies. They were awkward, messy, sobbing and anger tangled together. Children clung, then pulled away, then clung again. Some didn't recognize mothers at first. Some looked over shoulders, expecting to be taken back. Eliza watched other families reunite and felt a weight in her chest. Because for every child who came back, there were still names on Ruth's list that hadn't been matched to a face. Some children had already been moved farther. Some had been sold under new names. Some had been broken into silence. Isaiah told his story in fragments. At night, sitting on the edge of Eliza's bed, staring at the wall, he described the shed, the papers, the man who wrote in ink and called it law. He described the boat, the fear, the way the river sounded when you were tied and couldn't move. And then he said something that made Eliza's stomach twist. "They took little Ben's friend," Isaiah whispered. Eliza's breath caught. "Who?" Isaiah swallowed. "Caleb," he said. "He was with us. He got sick. They took him off the boat at a stop. I don't know where." Eliza closed her eyes. The story didn't end at the landing. The landing was a crack in the system, not the collapse. Ruth sent word. Moses rode to another county. They followed rumors. They searched lumber camps. They asked carefully about contract boys. Sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes they found a child under a new name. And each time they did, the ring's logic was exposed again. Rename, relocate, erase, repeat. What happened to the men Kessler did not become a folk villain dragged from office in chains. He did what men with systems behind them do. He shifted. He claimed misunderstanding. He claimed protective custody. He claimed the children were delinquents. And because he had a badge and friends and the county's gratitude for keeping order, he wasn't destroyed. But he wasn't untouched. State scrutiny follows you like a shadow. It changes how boldly you move. It changes who trusts you. It changes how many doors open. And in some versions of this story, passed mouth to mouth in the Delta, Kessler eventually left the county. Not fired, not convicted, just relocated. Because sometimes, the system's way of protecting itself is moving a problem to another place. Mr. Pike kept his levee work. The river still rose, shovels still struck dirt. But the community's eyes were different. They watched, they recorded, they whispered yes, but now the whisper carried a hard edge. We remember. And remembering is dangerous to people who rely on forgetting. Why children were the target. If you step back from the specifics, names, wagons, landings, the logic becomes cold and clear. Children were targeted because they were easier to move, because a child's protest could be dismissed, because paperwork could swallow a child's identity faster than an adult's, because in a world built on labor extraction, a child's years were valuable, not to their family, to the men who wanted their hands. And because taking a child did something else, it disciplined everyone. It told parents, you don't control even the future. It made a whole community careful. Careful communities are profitable. Quiet communities are controllable. And the Delta in 1887 was designed to reward control. The river keeps a record. Years later, people still told the story of that Saturday night at the landing. Not as a victory, as a warning. They said the river that night smelled like iron. They said the lantern light made the children's faces look like ghosts. They said Eliza Carter walked out of the willows like she was carved from anger. They said Reverend Moses held a Bible like a shield, and it worked, for once. They said Miss Ruth's notebook became more powerful than a deputy's badge. And they said something else. They said the river kept the truth better than the courthouse did, because the courthouse could stamp lies. The river could only reflect what stood on its banks. And on that bank, in 1887, something stood that usually didn't. Witnesses, not perfect, not protected but present. Closing reflection. The Mississippi Delta. Disappearances of 1887 aren't just a story about children taken from a levee. They're a story about how freedom can be stolen without a chain being shown in daylight. About how paper can become a weapon. About how authority can turn theft into procedure. And they're a story about the small, stubborn forms of courage that show up when everything is designed to crush you. A teacher writing names in a hidden notebook. A preacher refusing to accept a shrug as an answer. A riverman deciding his silence costs too much. A newspaper printer risking retaliation to make truth travel. And a mother who, when told to go home, chooses the dark road instead. Because if this story has one lesson that reaches forward, it's this. Systems that make people disappear don't rely on monsters. They rely on ordinary people believing it's safer to look away. So here are two questions to sit with. If you lived in that delta, if the river was rising, if the levee work was necessary, if a deputy told you a child had wandered, what would you have believed? And when the quiet machinery starts working, what does it take to make you speak before the sound is swallowed? The river looked asleep that first night. But it wasn't. It was watching. And so were they.